Story 1. Being independent and never asking for help, even when I truly needed it, shaped my experience. From a young age, I realized that no one was going to assist me, so I figured everything out on my own. This approach was not the best way to navigate adolescence. I could have really benefited from having an adult who had my best interests in mind. Story 2. I frequently asked my mother if I was pregnant. I was being sexually abused, and she never picked up on it, despite my questions. Story 3. Pulling my hair out, picking my skin, and constantly seeking approval and reassurance. The list goes on, and I still engage in many of these behaviors as an adult, minus the hair pulling. I have improved in terms of apologizing for no reason, though. Baby steps. Story 4. Constantly reading books to escape my reality was the only thing that made me happy. Everyone was so mean to me as a child. Story 5. I still do this to this day. Whenever someone says my name, I always respond, "What's wrong?" Or "What did I do?" I had a terribly lonely childhood and was only called when I either did something wrong or when dinner was ready. Story 6. Not wanting to shower began after I experienced sexual abuse. This, combined with sleeping in my clothes and a persistent stomach ache, affected me greatly. If my parents had recognized those cries for help, perhaps I would have felt comfortable opening up to them about the abuse. Story 7. Being good. Slowly, it occurred to me that I was never going to earn my mother's interest or pride by being a good child because I fundamentally bored her. She was not interested in the things I found enjoyable. I was always going to have to seek people like me, and no amount of dancing around like a circus bear was ever going to make me worthy of her fascination. Art. Hi, hello. I love you. Take a deep breath and relax your shoulders. Don't grind your teeth. It will give you a headache. There will always be people like you and people who love you, and the sun will come back if you wait for the rain. Again, I love you. Go forward in kindness. Story 8. In elementary school, I went to the nurse every day, usually after recess, because of a stomach ache. It got to the point where she would notice if I didn't come in on a certain day. Now, I understand that the stomach ache was caused by anxiety. I had no idea what was happening, and my family never truly looked into it. I feel bad for that little girl who suffered from untreated anxiety. Story 9. When I was 5, I got in trouble at kindergarten for hiding under tables frequently. I was even sent to the principal's office for it. It turned out I had undiagnosed autism and was just trying to get a sensory break. It was nice, quiet, and dark under there, and I was just trying to find some relief. To be honest, even if I had been diagnosed in 1991, those people would not have done anything helpful about it. Story 10. I enjoyed reading books and imagining living in those worlds. I seldom spoke unless asked a question because I was afraid of getting in trouble. Story 11. I stayed in my bedroom most of the time. I was too afraid to go outside, even to get food or water. My father was often abusive when he drank. Story 12. I have learned not to cry in certain situations when people yell at me. I acquired this understanding during my childhood when I often got in trouble. Story 13. I kept everything to myself. I was stressed about school, being bullied, and had a fight with my friend. My older sister was a challenging teenager, and my parents argued frequently, so I didn't want to add any more stress to their lives. Unfortunately, I'm still doing it. Story 14. Being the therapist of the family, especially for both parents and my friend group, I often find myself in serious need of support and kindness. I have dealt with severe childhood abuse and neglect, along with being autistic, having attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I am tired of being treated like everyone's emotional support or punching bag. I am emotionally intelligent, but I yearn for mutual support instead of constant exploitation. Many friends start out appearing willing to support me, but even now, I have a friend who, following a 2-month relationship breakup, calls me at all hours while I am struggling with my own depression and suicidal thoughts. I believe in helping her, but I feel used because I assist her, yet I remain depressed and struggling. She only reaches out when she wants something. She RSVP'd to my artist reception for a show focused on sexual assault awareness. which is important to me due to my own experiences in childhood. The art show meant a lot to me, yet she never attended or even acknowledged missing it. Still, she expects me to answer her spontaneous calls whenever she pleases. I am so drained by this situation. Story 15. I would take a 5 or 7 hour nap right when I got home from school to avoid dealing with my family, then sit alone all night while they slept. Story 16. Wetting the bed. I am now 42 years old. I experienced this until my teenage years. I was physically and sexually abused. A teenager wetting the bed would raise significant concerns about abuse today. However, in the 1980s and early 1990s, my pediatrician did not take it seriously and blamed me. Story 17. I would bite the skin around my nails. It got so bad that the bites were too deep, and the skin would be peeled back to my fingerprint. Story 18. Starting around age 8, I absolutely needed some sort of noise in my room when I went to bed. Usually, it was the radio. As time went on, I required noise around me at all times. If I didn't, I would have a panic attack. It took until age 17 before I understood why I needed noise so desperately. My father was very verbally abusive, and in my mind, noise was normal, while silence was something to be feared. If the house was quiet, he was preparing for his next outburst, and we never knew when it would occur. I finally overcame my fear of silence 2 or 3 years ago, in my late 30s. It took a double ear infection and a week of sheer terror, but I can finally be in a silent place. I can even sleep through the night without a sound. Story 19. I became obsessed with attending boarding school after reading several Enid Blyton books, such as Mallory Towers. I believed it was the solution to a problem I didn't understand at the time, which turned out to be emotional neglect and abuse. I even made my own uniform, wore it daily, and styled my hair like my favorite characters from the stories. I requested prospectuses from actual boarding schools by mail and studied them closely, deciding which extracurricular activities I would join and what my daily routine would look like. At the age of 8, I was convinced that boarding school was where I would thrive, and I begged my parents to send me there. Deep down, I thought that if I weren't around, they would miss me and take pride in my achievements at boarding school, thus demonstrating their love for me. This became a specific coping mechanism from ages 8 to 12. Story 20. Reading helped me forget reality, and most importantly, I wasn't bothering anyone with my presence. Story 21. I enthusiastically bit my fingernails and occasionally my toenails as a child. Looking back, I realize I may have been a bit high-strung. Story 22. I would say no thanks, or I'm not hungry to toys and snacks when my parents offered them because I knew we were poor. I felt that it was one way to help my parents save money. I was about 8 years old. Story 23. I used to stay up late and take long showers to think. I believed that if I contemplated something long enough, I would find an answer or a way to feel better. Now it has turned into hyperfocusing on issues, which causes extreme stress and anxiety. Story 24. When I was 8, I was fully convinced I had to die as a sacrifice or spend my whole life serving others to make up for whatever I had done. Apparently, I had done something unforgivable by that age. Story 25. At 67, it has just occurred to me that I have been autistic all my life. A list of telltale signs matched my lifelong behaviors exactly. Of course, they weren't looking for it when I was young, and now that I am older, it hardly matters. Story 26. As a parent, I want to hug all your inner children and tell you that you are good, worthy, wanted, and loved. Story 27. Self-isolating and maladaptive daydreaming. If I was alone, things were easier. And if I couldn't be alone, I could pretend I was. Story 28. I used to blink only in sequences of 3. If I messed it up, I had to blink 30 times in a row to clear it, or I would end up in an alternate reality. I'm sure it was about control and obsessive-compulsive behavior, but the alternate reality aspect is disturbing. Story 29. No one ever wondered why every word out of my mouth was a lie. No one ever thought that was strange and that I should seek therapy. I was suppressing my violent rape as a 7-year-old, which everyone assumed was a fabrication when I first shared it. Story 30. Precociousness. Adults related to my conversation more than people my own age. Later, I met a romantic partner who had a similar experience for different reasons. While she wasn't being abused in the same way, she had alcoholic parents. From age 12 onward, she basically had to manage cooking, cleaning, and caring for her younger siblings. Is it strange to think I had it easier? Story 31. Walking around the dining room table for hours in a specific way was a routine for me. While looking at colleges, a legitimate concern was where I would continue my circle walks. Surprisingly, once I moved out of my childhood home, I no longer felt the compulsion to do that. Story 32. I ate a lot of ice before anyone realized that I was anemic. It was an ongoing family joke that I always had a cup of ice with me to crunch on, even when it was cold outside. When I started taking an iron supplement, the ice cravings went away almost immediately. Story 33. Constant bad dreams and waking up having cried in my sleep. It was only 20 years later in therapy that I realized I hadn't felt safe as a child. Story 34. Holding in bowel movements led to extreme constipation, causing me to be hospitalized at age 10. I didn't realize until my late teens that I had been sexually abused for a significant part of my childhood. I also experienced mysterious chronic hematuria, which is blood in the urine, and urinary tract infections. There are always warning signs. My mother is a nurse. You would expect her to have noticed, but the issues were blamed on me because I wasn't clean, and I was often lectured about hygiene. Story 35. Doing everything I could to hurt my dad, whom I loved so much, but he was the one person I knew I could hurt deeply. I was just so broken and angry at the time that I wanted someone to hurt as badly as I did. And I knew I could hurt him the most. My dad loved me unconditionally and tried to help me through everything. I explained to him when I got older why I went after him, and he understood, but the guilt I still carry is terrible. My dad would tell me that there was nothing to feel guilty about. I was young and had been hurt, and if he could take that away from me, he would have. He passed in 2021, and I miss him every single day. Story 36. I started counting calories when I was about 7, and it turned into a full-blown eating disorder by the time I was 12. Story 37. Here goes. Intense daydreaming, but not in a fun way, imagining my own death just to see how my funeral would be and who would come. That has now turned into going over the same actions every night to fall asleep. The scenario is less dark. I'm living and working in a tower in New York City on September 11th, and I go through my routine very meticulously. Shout out to security guard Steve, who gets me coffee on Wednesdays. I don't drink coffee. I'm usually asleep by the time Dina introduces the new intern. Touching hot things and eating excruciatingly hot food because I liked the way it made my mouth feel when it blistered. The military broke me of that habit because they believe in nothing but warm food. My therapist informed me that it was a form of self-harm. Casual choking sessions. I don't know how it started, but if I got overstimulated, which happened a lot in a chaotic house, I would take a silky piece of fabric and wrap it around my neck. My earliest memory of it was at age 6. I still do it from time to time, but mainly a little pressure from my hand helps. Unlocking the front door at night so that in case something happened, I could get my siblings out faster. Pulling out my eyebrows, eyelashes, and hair starting around ages 6 to 7. I just liked the feeling. Honorable mention. Sitting in a dry bathtub with a blanket and staring at the wall for what seemed like hours. Those are the ones that stick out. Story 38. I would sleep in my closet or under my bed. My parents had constant screaming fights that involved throwing things and slamming doors. It happened at all times of the day and night. I instinctively hid so my parents wouldn't see me and pull me into their arguments. I didn't realize it was unusual until I finally went to a sleepover and wanted to make a fort in my friend's closet to sleep. She told me how strange it was. Story 39. Staying awake late into the night because I would be caught in a cycle of thanking God for everything and asking him to protect me. Then adding a Hail Mary when I requested something, and feeling immense guilt if I forgot to pray for someone. I would have to offer special intentions for them the next night. Story 40. Pulling out my hair one strand at a time. There were days in class when I would end up with a pile on the floor next to me. It turns out that this is called trichotillomania and is one of my major signs of stress. Story 41. I slept in my closet for 2 years. I came home from school feeling distressed, and my mom removed the closet doors and hung beads instead. After that, I slept in my heavy winter coat for about a year. One day, I came home and found that my coat was gone. A month later, my mom told me that my dog couldn't sleep in my room because he had chewed up the blind. This was the early 1970s, and blinds were much tougher back then. She replaced the blind, and a month later, she said it was okay for the dog to come into my room. I guess she realized that when the new blind was chewed up, it wasn't the dog causing the problem. Story 42. Having a good memory. I could replay entire conversations, remember what people were wearing, and visualize the environment. It turns out I was hypervigilant from having unstable, unpredictable, and abusive parents. They were also highly critical and uninterested in me unless I did something wrong, which led to significant social anxiety in my childhood. I replayed every social interaction in my mind for days, weeks, and sometimes even years, analyzing everything I said and did. I still do this, actually. So yes, I remembered everything. Story 43. Scolding my friends. I rarely had friends over because when they stayed the night, I was constantly on their case like a sheepdog. Don't change the volume. Don't use more than one cup. Walk softly to avoid making noise downstairs. Don't leave the water running. Don't use too much toilet paper. My parents hated sharing their home with anyone, especially me. I had to be as invisible as possible, and I knew my friends had to do the same. I once had a friend banned from coming over because he jumped in the pool when I invited him to swim. My dad was upset that the noise was loud and water got all over the pavers. Story 44. I cleaned the house thoroughly after putting all my siblings to bed, while my mom was at the bar to avoid her coming home angry. Story 45. I was obsessed with safety. I spent my pocket money on window alarms from the dollar store for my windows. I made a fire exit plan for my house and family. I had numbers for poison control written down. I'd go around and lock the doors each night. We lived in the country and it upset my dad. I tell my parents why I shouldn't be allowed to walk across town after school alone. I'd refuse to look out a window at night or sleep with my back not against a wall. Things like that. It turns out my parents never made me feel safe and secure, and I also had nearly crippling anxiety. Story 46. Nail biting and skin picking. My mother's manicurist didn't even want to do my nails when she saw them. Story 47. I was alone for most of my childhood, so I did things myself. I once mentioned needing to cook at a young age to some coworkers, and they exchanged a knowing glance and said it made sense. That kind of surprised me. I appreciate my independence, although I don't really recognize it myself. However, it seems that it can be overwhelming for others. Story 48. I am the oldest of 2 siblings and have always daydreamed about having an older sister. She would stand up for me when other kids and teachers were bullying me. She would listen to me when I tried to talk about something deeply personal and important. She would help me navigate the world, including social skills and fashion. She would provide me with encouragement and support and cheer me on. In the last year, I have begun to realize that what I was truly longing for was a mother. To clarify, I do have a mother who was physically present throughout my childhood, but she has always been emotionally unavailable and at times emotionally and physically abusive. She is extremely narcissistic and clearly has a favorite child, which is not me. She prioritizes my brother over me, even when that is objectively worse for everyone involved. Story 49. I have been apologizing as if everything was my fault, as I often get blamed for various issues. A friend pointed out that I was apologizing for something I had no involvement in, and I recognized this pattern I have followed for years. Story 50. I used to daydream to my favorite songs and never watched the music videos because my mind would imagine the official music video instead of creating my own with me as the singer. I now know this is called maladaptive daydreaming. Story 51. I thought I was sick all the time due to anxiety. I also used to put makeup on my face to look sick, hoping someone would take care of me. Story 52. Pulling out my eyelashes turned out to be a fun anxiety disorder called trichotillomania. I still battle it, but not nearly as much as I used to. Story 53. Needing to be the best at everything led to extreme stress, resulting in meltdowns and panic attacks at the thought of being just average. I was terrified of being a disappointment or bringing shame to my family. Now, I am a university dropout with an average job, still learning to drive, no major future plans, a minimal social life, and a repetitive routine, but I am much happier for it. I take pride in my personal accomplishments, and I have learned to find joy in everything I choose to do, even if I am not the highest earner, the smartest, or the most talented. Story 54. I used to ask my parents whether I should become a foot model because I had pretty feet. I realized later that it was because I had never received any compliments on my appearance, only negative feedback from my classmates, and I was looking for affirmation that I had at least one positive attribute. Story 55. Skin picking, hiding in closets, and making nests in my bed. My head in the clouds and my nose in a book constantly. I struggle with poor social skills, memorizing full television commercials and repeating them in the grocery store since I was around 18 months old. I have intense special interests and sensory aversions. The list goes on. I am a middle-aged woman pursuing an autism assessment, yet my parents still dismiss the idea that there is anything wrong with me. Story 56. I would never let men stand or be behind me. I always needed to keep them in my line of sight. I would shift out of the way so that a man couldn't be behind me. If a man put his hand on my shoulder, I would recoil and immediately create distance between us. I also experienced panic attacks around men who were in any state of undress, such as in a changing room or at the beach. Story 57. At 14 and 15, I realized I was dissociating most of the time, although I didn't know that was what it was. I remember thinking, wow, life is just blurring by me. I should try to be in the moment more. It helped, but I wasn't able to get mental health support until I was 18. I have no recollection of when the dissociation began, but I had an incredibly active imagination. My best guess is that maladaptive daydreaming started young and eventually shifted as my anger and angst grew. I still escape into daydreams frequently, but it doesn't disrupt my ability to function as an adult. Story 58. Constant daydreaming, obsessively reading books, being accommodating to others, and getting along well with adults. Story 59. I constantly read. I locked myself in the bathroom to read instead of cleaning my room, read during class when I was supposed to be paying attention, brought a book to family events, and read at the dinner table. I was a socially anxious child with untreated inattentive attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and many executive function challenges. Story 60. I've almost always been friends with people older than me or with others my age who are mature for their age. Story 61. I enjoy reading excessively, often walking through my house with a book in hand and finishing a book in a single day. Story 62. I felt ignored and invisible, so I often limped, hoping someone would notice me and ask, "What happened? Are you okay?" Story 63. I never answered a question when asked by the teacher in class because I was too afraid of sounding like an idiot. Story 64. I thought to myself, if I make it through this green light, I'll have a good day. I was experiencing extreme anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder, but I didn't have a name for it until I was around 26. Story 65. Reading all the time was my way to escape reality. Meanwhile, I was praised for being a smart, quiet, and well-behaved child. Story 66. Wow, this thread has brought up some serious emotions for me, and apparently for many of us. Wishing all of you the best on your journeys. I completed a course of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, and it helped a lot, although I still dissociate and self-medicate when life is too much for me. Sending love to all of us. We found ways to survive the unsurvivable. I think my biggest breakthrough was finally accepting the fact that even though I was not responsible for what happened to me as a child, and as unfair as it is, I am responsible for my own healing. I had to let go of the unfairness before I could start to heal. Love to all of you fellow survivors. Story 67. Absolute attention seeker. Once I was a bit older, I became fixated on attention from men. My worth was determined by how much people loved, liked, or paid attention to me. Those feelings were different, but they all felt the same at the time. Story 68. Being a people pleaser, I wasn't allowed to say no or speak my mind at home. My mom was extremely emotionally volatile, and I had to learn to constantly be on my best behavior to avoid triggering an outburst. As an adult, it took a lot of therapy to free myself from the feeling of always walking on eggshells. Story 69. At a young age, I stopped wanting to have birthdays. I came to associate being the center of attention with being disciplined. As a result, it became an anxiety trigger for me, and I still struggle with it to this day. Story 70. I was always reading a book, and looking back, it was the only appropriate way for me to avoid my mother. Story 71. I sucked my thumb publicly until I was 14. Now at 43, I still wake up with my thumb in my mouth sometimes. Story 72. Not having many friends or talking to people when I started high school made me feel really shy and desire solitude. Being introverted has little to do with this. Introverts can still make many friends. I built walls around myself because it felt safer than letting people in. Story 73. I created a soft space filled with stuffed animals in my closet. When I came home from being bullied at school for 10 years, I could cry and feel safe there. Each time I tried to tell adults, they would often respond with phrases like, "Girls just say things like that. You're being too sensitive," or "just get over it." Eventually, I stopped confiding in them, cried in private, and tried to maintain a brave face. Story 74. Overeating. I felt happy when I was full, and my dad was always introducing me to new foods. I mimicked the happiness I saw in cartoons when my favorite characters ate appetizing food. My mom didn't realize that my overeating had deeper roots. Her idea of helping me was to yell, "Stop eating," loudly in front of everyone during family gatherings. She would also say, "If you keep eating like this, you won't find clothes that fit you." I don't think she understood my eating disorder. Story 75. I would pack a bag during school holidays and weekends, leaving the house as the sun came up and not returning until it went down. I talked to imaginary friends as I walked around the bush, creating little shelters that I visited and maintained for my imaginary friends. Looking back, I realized that by the time I was 10, none of my friends from school were allowed to come to my house anymore due to the violence within it, and visiting theirs was not an option. We lived in a small rural community, and I often wonder why, if it was so apparent to the adults that my house was not safe and I was displaying signs of abuse, such as writing a poem about suicide for a fifth-grade assignment so I could be safe and showing up to school with bruises, including once with a broken wrist that was left untreated and prevented me from writing. Did nobody help me? All it did was engrave into me that I was worth nothing. Story 76. I was very quiet as a child. I chose not to speak unless necessary until I was around 9 years old. My dad regularly punished me because of his strong Christian beliefs. I was beaten at 4 years old on the side of a highway because my dad pulled over to do it after I couldn't remember how to pray the rosary. So yes, they are connected. Story 77. Pulling out my toenails repeatedly whenever one started to grow back. I did this to create blood to cover other parts of my body, as my abuser was less inclined to touch me when I was bleeding. My parents believed it was just anxiety. Story 78. Dare I say, skin picking is a real issue, similar to picking at scab wounds and pimples. After witnessing something traumatic happen to my family, instead of sending me to therapy, my mother sent me to stay with my aunt. At the time, my cousin had chickenpox, which, of course, infected me. With all the stress and uncertainty regarding my family's well-being, I began picking at my chickenpox marks, and it developed into a habit that continues to this day. I recently learned that it's an actual disorder called dermatillomania. It's frustrating because I can't even wear shorts or short-sleeve shirts. Story 79. I like to postpone eating to see if anyone noticed. The longer they didn't notice, the longer I wouldn't eat. It got really bad. I would go days without eating, and the pain was somehow comforting, like I was alive. When they found out about my third suicide attempt, they sent me to a psychiatric hospital. They mostly ignored my first 2 attempts. They just bandaged my wrists the first time and pumped my stomach the second and third times. The hospital discovered my eating disorder and probably saved my life. My foster families never noticed that I didn't eat. Story 80. Mine is also a subtle cue related to autism. I never liked getting my hair cut. I did it because that is what my dad and older brother were doing, and we always went together. When I got older and my brother was often busy, it stopped being the three of us. My dad couldn't always find the time, so my mom would drive me, or I would ride my bike. I quickly understood that I hated getting my hair cut. I would put it off, my hair would get long, people would start teasing me, and my parents would comment on it. I started telling my parents I didn't want to get my hair cut because it hurts. They would argue with me that it didn't, and I would insist that it did. That continued into early adulthood. I am in my 30s now and still maintain that it does, but I understand more why now. My wife used to try to explain to me that it was impossible for it to hurt because there are no nerve endings. Eventually, we talked it through one time. Why does it hurt? They are pulling on it, it's uncomfortable, I don't like it, and I don't want to talk to them. I listed all the reasons I didn't like haircuts. She clarified that it's not physically painful, and I said that it was deeply uncomfortable to the point that it felt like physical pain. I had never been able to articulate it until that point. It is pretty common for children on the spectrum to hate haircuts. I am not formally diagnosed because I am very borderline, but as my psychologist said, I have enough traits associated with autism that I can probably relate very well to autistic people and would find many coping mechanisms applicable to me as well. If my parents or anyone had picked up on that, maybe I would have understood myself a bit better a lot sooner. For the record, I still don't like it and still find it deeply uncomfortable to the point that it feels like physical pain. But I have a great barber now. He knows how I like my hair and cuts it in a way that it can grow for 2 to 3 months without looking too bad. We like the same music, so the vibe is good. We have discovered we both like smoking meat, so we just talk about that here and there while he works. If I'm not feeling chatty and give short responses, he picks up on it quickly and stops asking. He is expensive, but worth every penny to me. I'm actually going tomorrow. Story 81. I still have a habit of constantly checking and double-checking that I am doing things correctly. Is this where I put the item? So you want me to do this, right? Our meeting is at 3 p.m., correct? It wasn't until fairly recently that I realized I behaved this way because my parents were poor communicators and often expected me to do things in certain ways or at specific times, but they were never clear about it, if they even mentioned it at all. I would do the dishes but get in trouble for putting the bowls on the wrong shelf. I would clean the living room but get in trouble for throwing away mail or grocery ads. I would clean my room but get in trouble for not doing the dishes. No matter what I did, I always felt I did something wrong. Now, even as an adult, I feel the need to confirm details and experience significant anxiety about completing tasks that someone else asked me to do because I am afraid of making mistakes. I have gotten in trouble at jobs before for asking too many questions because I should have known the answers. I did know the answers, but I had to make sure I was right. Story 82. Talk to my imaginary friends out loud. My family definitely thought I was off my rocker, and I can't say I'm not. Story 83. I touched my face frequently, likely as a response to my undiagnosed anxiety. My dad often scolded me in public for this behavior, which didn't help. He was adept at picking apart small things I did. Story 84. Full-blown panic attacks started around the age of 11 to 12. My parents did little more than encourage me to trust in Jesus' love. Thank you. Story 85. Hating being touched and being around people, I dive into my core school work like a good gifted student. Experiencing depression and social anxiety. Story 86. Pulling out my hair happened when I was in 6th grade after being badly bullied in 5th grade. I am 68 years old. Story 87. Constantly reading and drawing dark and depressing art suitable for a 7-year-old while rarely leaving my room. Story 88. Daydreaming and being a loner, I had a fantasy life playing in my head all day for some time during middle school and early high school. I was somewhat disassociated from reality at times. Story 89. I looked for reasons to stay at school, often joining clubs I did not want to be part of and wandering the halls for hours. I did not want to go home. I felt like Harry Potter at Hogwarts. Home was miserable. My sister experienced the same, but she spent most of her time at friends' houses. I was confused by the fact that I had almost no memories of her during high school. I mentioned this to her one day when we were in our 20s, and she said, "Oh yeah, I lived almost entirely at friends' houses. I would spend 2 nights at one, then 2 nights at another, then a night at home to do laundry, then back to friends." Story 90. The persistent feeling that spending too much time with me will cause others to become depressed makes me avoid getting too close to anyone. If someone showed signs of distress, it was my cue to withdraw to protect them. I often feel like a burden in general. I keep all my interests to myself out of fear of shame or judgment. I constantly apologize for things and show overgratitude. Other people's parents have noticed this. I remain vigilant about other people's emotions, engaging in chronic people-pleasing. I fixate on being the rescuer when someone is in distress. I have extreme self-deprecating tendencies bordering on masochism, seeking hurt or criticism. This has been an issue since early childhood. I obsess over making my parents like me, often agreeing with everything, and I manufacture my worldview and script replies based on what I think they'd like to hear in any situation. For a time, I found it very difficult to write down or even acknowledge my own name, which I remember from around age 4. I was racked with a sense of shame and discomfort. I constantly preoccupy myself with the need to overachieve, resulting in crushing self-loathing when unable to do so. I don't think you would pick up on most of this by observing me or talking to me. I am in my 30s now and on my 5th round of therapy, totaling about 7 years. Everything I have done in my life up to this point has been focused on trying to be okay. That's all I want out of life. I am slowly climbing out of the hole. Story 91. I would pull out my hair, pick and bite my nails, and hit myself. Growing up, I realized that I wasn't supposed to handle stress in such an aggressive way. Back then, I thought nothing of it. Story 92. Eating quickly to leave the dinner table was something I always did to return outside or go back to my room to play. I didn't realize until I spoke with one of my psychology professors during lunch that I was trying to avoid my father, who was verbally and emotionally abusive. Story 93. I collected stuffed animals because I knew they would always be happy to see me. Other aspects have already been mentioned, but that one was a significant moment for me when it came up in therapy. Significant social and emotional neglect, along with undiagnosed anxiety and depression, contributed to a rather unusual childhood. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.